Okay, 1Corinthians. Is that a fun book or what? Talking about a book with problems. Hey, at least makes you feel better, when you think we have problems in our church, right? All right. 1Corinthians, let me tell you a little bit about some background, and then we'll move forward. I'll show you a little bit about how I think Paul was organizing his book, and so that hopefully we can also bring some application. I have 1Corinthians 13 printed out, so when we get there, I would like you to look at it, and so that we all are using the same text. That is why I did that. All right, let's talk a little bit about the city Corinth. Now, the city was initially built around 7th century BC. By the 5th century BC, an estimated a number of 70,000 people were living there, which is in those days a large city. For us, maybe it's small, but in those days it was very large, 70,000. By 146 BC, the city rebelled against the Romans and was destroyed. And for about 100 years, the city was left in ruins. But then Julius Caesar saw the strategic location of the city for military purposes, trade purposes, and so he began to rebuild it. And actually the Romans started to pump a lot of money into the city. So for reconstruction. So under the various emperors, such as Tiberius and Claudius, which is already in the time of Jesus and after Jesus, we see a lot of money goes into this city. And so by that time, Corinth became a very large and international city, drawing a lot of people from all over the empire to it, up to the point that perhaps 500,000 people end up living there, which is only a little bit smaller than Rome. It may be the second largest city of the Roman Empire after Rome. It became a capital city of the Roman province that's called Achaia in 27 BC. So that's again just before, of course, the birth of Jesus and so forth. So it became a Roman capital as well, so of a province. And it was famous because it would compete with Athens for their own version of Olympic Games. And they are called the Isthmian Games. And so when you read, for example, in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 24 to 27, when Paul is talking about, and he's actually having the Isthmian Games in mind, when he's talking about we are in a race, he's thinking of a boxing match, he talks about discipline, he thinks therefore of athletic discipline, and everybody is having a crown that ends the race, a victory crown. And chapter 9, verses 24 to 27 of 1 Corinthians. When it comes to religion, of course, like many of those cities, there were many, many, many temples and shrines all over the city. You would just think in America when you go to a food court and you have all these different restaurants together. Well, they have like temple streets where all the temples and shrines are together, and so you can go worship here and you can cross the street, go and see a prostitute over there and so forth. This is very typical. So that's kind of like a comparison, all right? Many gods were worshipped, and so each god would have their own little temple and shrine. Now, when it comes to, let me try to remember what. When it comes to the economy, Corinth was located in an isthmus. Does anybody know what an isthmus is? Do I pronounce it correctly? Isthmus. It is like a little strip of land with water on both sides. So it's like a little strip of land that connects a greater mass of land there, and then but it is like it divides the water, and so the Corinth was like on a isthmus, and so it is spelled Thmus, isthmus. So it is like a piece of land between two seas. Now, if I had a map, which of course we don't, so I could show it to you, how it is like it is in what is today is like Athens, Greece, and then you have this little isthmus. And what is unique about Corinth, the ancient city of Corinth, is that it had two splendid harbors. It had two harbors because on both sides of the isthmus. Yeah, both sides of the isthmus. And the reason why it had two harbors is, besides the fact that they are natural harbors, so it's like perfect for it, and that is also why it became a very, very important city, because it had not only one, but two harbors. But also it became a transportation hub. You see, what happens is, if you picture yourself what is today Greece, all right, if you picture that piece of land, in order for people to go by below Greece and go over, sail around Greece like that, they have to go past very volatile waters, and shipwreck would happen a lot, because it is so unstable, the water right around there. And so it was much better for them, for people that would trade, and they need to trade, but they need to pass Greece. Say, for example, they're on their way to Rome. It would be much better for them to go to the one harbor on one side of the isthmus, and then unload all their goods, and then transport all of the goods overland, which is about 6 miles, to the other harbor, and then put it back on another boat in the second harbor, and then continue the journey. And it is a 3.5 mile journey, and this road has been excavated, so you can actually see it. You will see, like, you see even where the wheels have gone when they are transporting all the goods from one place to the other, because it's like a train track that was eventually developed, so that all the goods will be transported overland for 3.5 miles. It is called the Diolkos, which is spelled Diolkos. All right. So what really they would need is like a canal, a man-made canal, so that the ships actually could go through. And even Caesar Nero tried to build that, but failed. And only in 1893 AD, so it's only like less than 200 years ago, they built finally the canal, the Corinthian Canal is it called now. So now, only like 150 years ago or so, they built that canal, but the need and the desire to have it has been there for thousands of years, because it is such a strategic, it is such a good way of being safely move goods from one place to the other, and having to avoid these very unstable waters that causes a lot of shipwreck. All right, now why do I say all this? Okay, I'm saying all this because what do you do when you're a Corinthian, when you live in Corinth, and you want to make a buck on the side? You collect transportation taxes. You want to go past here, you have to pay import duty or export duty, all right? So it's like another road tax, all right? And it is super easy money, because you didn't have to do anything for it. You just collect the money, because it is just a benefit of being in a perfect location. Same as, say, in my country, when you're in Holland, we have Rotterdam. Rotterdam is like a very, very big harbor. It's a very important port city, and almost a lot of the trade that goes into all of Europe, if it is by ship, almost guaranteed it will go through Rotterdam. So it becomes a very great way of making money. We have a harbor right there. And so Singapore would be like another example, or Hong Kong. Okay, all the trade goes into China. Well, guaranteed that it will be Hong Kong will become like a transportation hub. And so Corinth is a transportation hub, making a lot of money, easy money. Now picture if you have a teenager son and he is 16 years old and he just suddenly earns $1 million. What happened to that 16-year-old boy when he suddenly has $1 million to spend?
It's not great for him.
Huh?
It's not good for him.
Okay, that will not go off too well. He probably will become a spoiled brat. Easy money, being able to just spend and buy anything that his heart desires, right? Well, that is a little bit what's going on in Corinth. And that is they are very wealthy, they are very spoiled too. They are like just, they can, there is little restraint, they can live a free lifestyle. All right. Being a harbor city, it will draw also a lot of prostitutes, both female and male prostitutes. All right. And they were in an abundance. We would have also a lot of freed slaves that will be roaming the cities day and night. All right. Now imagine if you just got saved. You're in Corinth and you have become a new believer. Life was wealth comes easy, life is good. And in your past, you were living an immoral life to the fullest. And then suddenly you get saved. Now when you're getting saved, do you change overnight? Are you a complete different person? All right? That's my question. Do you just change overnight and everything is going to be, everything that you did in the past is just past?
Some people do. It depends on the situation.
Okay.
It takes a little longer.
Right. Do you also think everything in your mind, like is your mind totally automatically transformed? Or like it says in Romans chapter 12, that Paul is still instructing the Romans, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. I think there's still also, you're right, there is a yes to it, to the answer, and that is we are born again. The Spirit of God comes and dwells in us. That happens overnight. So yes, Maria is right, and that is, there is a change, all right? We are born again. But we don't exactly have new bodies, all right? Or a new mind overnight, yeah? So the only thing that really happens is that the Spirit comes when we are born again. But still a lot of reconstruction is needed in the life of the believer. Okay, reconstruction is needed, and overall, all right? And so the Corinthian Christians lived in a very godless society. Yeah?
Much like we do live today.
Exactly. All right. And so when you, for example, look at 1Corinthians chapter 5, you see that even, for example, incest was allowed in the church, or at least tolerated. They may not approve of it, but they also didn't deal with it. And so that is like an example of some of the things that still really needed a lot of change in the lives of the new believers, the young believers in the Corinthian church. Yeah? And so even the idea of, tolerating people that were committing incest didn't seem so terrible to them. And so for this reason, because of their immaturity, because of their lifestyle, because they don't exactly yet know how to live as Christians, Paul had to be very, very sometimes harsh and strong with his words. And he would speak words like, is Christ divided, when he speaks to them? Meaning, it's like picture the body of Jesus and you're breaking it up into pieces. Is Christ divided? Why do you boast? Okay, shall I come to you with a rod? Meaning, shall I come with a stick and beat you? And you're so arrogant, Paul says. I have already pronounced judgment. That is in particularly about the incest case in chapter 5. I already pronounced judgment. Deliver this man that did this to Satan. Okay? So he's not exactly friendly anymore. He's very, very harsh, very, very direct. He's rebuking the church. I say this to your shame. You yourself wrong and defraud at that. All right? So he is rebuking them. He is calling out the things that are wrong. He's calling them out wrong. All right? In their face. He's very in their face. All right? It's still by way of letter, but he's trying to be very much in the face of the believers at the Corinthian church. Not gentle, that he may be with other letters. For example, with the letter when he writes to the church in Philippi, he's much more gentle. It's like a theme of joy is actually in the letter, about joy and about rejoicing. So he's very different in his attitude. That's probably one of his favorite churches, Paul's favorite churches. It's also one of the only churches, maybe the only church that actually supported Paul, the church at Philippi. But here we are dealing with a very immature church that still needs a lot of growing to do because of their background. Yeah. So now Paul planted this church in his second missionary journey. All right. How many missionary journeys does Paul do?
I think there's about 7, right?
No, just 3.
Just 3.
3 major ones that we know of. At least 3 that are described in the book of Acts. And probably also when you look at Nelson maps and charts, they're probably like even drawn that you can have a map. And there are 3 missionary journeys. And the 4th journey would be the journey to Rome. And then he will be in prison. And then actually the book of Acts ends. The first missionary journey, he was sent out, and really like his base camp, like his place of operation would be considered Antioch. Like Paul and Barnabas were in Antioch, were sent out from Antioch and traveled to a number of cities in the middle, in that region, and would be able to plant some churches. The second one, he operated out of Ephesus. So he was still sent out from Antioch. Each time they're sent from Antioch, but lived most of his time during the missionary journey in Ephesus. So he was there for about, in Corinth, sorry. The second one is Corinth. And so he lived in Corinth for about 1.5 years. Started the church there, but also continued to minister in that region. And then the third one, the third missionary journey, his main place of operation became Ephesus. So you can see also the gospel going out from Jerusalem to Antioch, from Antioch to Corinth, from Corinth to Ephesus, like ever expanding, using different locations for his base, his main base to operate from. All right. So the church was planted in a second missionary journey, which would then be. I didn't write the dates, but so offhand I think it is from 50 to 50. So would be second missionary journey would be around 50 to 53, 54 AD, I think. Yeah. And then the third missionary journey, where his main location would be Ephesus, and so Paul wrote probably from Ephesus to this church in Corinth, around 55 AD. Yeah? So he wrote out of Ephesus. In Acts we read, by the time that Paul was operating out of Ephesus, that all Asia heard the gospel. So that's a big region that already has heard the gospel. So the gospel spread very fast. And so he was writing around this particular time, 55, 56 AD, from Ephesus to the church in Corinth. Corinthians that were a little bit spoiled because life was easy. They also lived immoral lives and needed to be addressed. Yeah? So, then you read 1 Corinthians. What do you think about it? Any questions when you were reading? Did you read 1 Corinthians? Did you get my email? Any questions, any observations you made when you were reading it?
I was immediately struck, God's timing is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had our children visiting us this week, and they're not Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And, so our effort to share with them,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just so perfect to read in a couple of places in here how Paul says, it's not because of my eloquent speech or what I
Right.
say, but rather the Holy Spirit that brings you. So
Yeah.
it was like we just kept having to give that over and over to God that,
Yeah. Yeah.
give us the words and,
Yeah.
and let it be your words.
Yeah.
And how our children always, it's like, it has to be rational and make sense. In Christianity, it doesn't make sense to them.
Right.
And to let go of that human wisdom piece
Yeah.
and recognize that it's by faith.
Yeah. Very good. Big chunk. Couple chapters in the beginning are all about human wisdom versus godly wisdom. Very good. Which will be chapter 1, 2, and 3, I think it is. Yeah. Very good. What else? What else? Any other observations?
Same thing on what Linda's saying, that it's nothing that we can do or not do that we're saved.
Uh-huh.
Like she says, it's all by faith.
Yeah.
Believing.
It's good. Good. Yeah.
So much of that humanness does enter in, that we want to puff ourselves up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what the Corinthian people
Mm-hmm.
do as well. Well, for us now, living this day and age, same thing.
Yeah.
It's always one-upsmanship, it seems like,
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. It's true.
And, God's way of thinking and His love is foolishness to us,
Yeah.
because our minds are so minute.
Yeah.
A lot of seem very applicable to us today. Just take Tone as an example. It's pretty easy living for a lot of people. Not everybody, homeless and so forth, but for most people, it's pretty easy living. And so the idea of changing from that is not readily acceptable. Just like it wasn't to the Corinthians. Hey, we got lots of money, we got a nice place to live. What problem?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of analogous
Yeah.
to that. Or not just the U.S. in general, that's probably applicable too, but specifically Hawaii.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. Very good. All right. So there are two really, just for a little bit more historical background, is just to share, if I can find markers, since now everything has moved.
They're in that plastic box, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Good. Yeah. Good. So,
To work on that whiteboard.
yeah. Yeah, maybe we can afford a new one, or
I've had a note here in my Bible for the last month, buy whiteboard paint to repaint.
yeah,
See if that works.
yeah. All right. So what we have in a common, so you have, okay. Number one, we have what we call dualism. Dualism is like black and white, good and evil. It's the extreme, the two sides. But when Plato, the Greek philosopher Plato, or do you say Plato? You say Plato, right?
Plato.
Plato. Not Play-Doh, but Plato. Okay? Plato, 400 BC, so that's a couple hundred years earlier. He really came, and he really, in his Greek philosophy, really began to teach that the body is evil. Anything, the material world is evil. What is good is the spiritual world. The invisible spiritual world is good. The physical, visible world is evil. Yeah, that's, for example, why it was difficult for people to accept. See, it is kind of like the reverse today when it comes to Jesus. All right, people had no problem believing that Jesus was divine in the time of the Corinthians and in that particular world. They had a problem believing that Jesus came in the flesh, because flesh is bad. Why would a spirit dwell in the flesh? So God coming in the flesh, they just didn't understand. Now it's the other way around. Today's society, people say that, oh, Jesus is a good man, but they don't believe he is God anymore. Like, so it's actually the reverse. And so that comes because of Plato. Plato? Plato. In Dutch we say Plato, not Play-Doh. All right? And it's because of, yeah, him. And so we have that dualistic mindset. So what do we do if we really believe that the body is evil? And I want to be spiritual, but the body is bad. Even today, so what do? So we have two reactions to this. One is called asceticism. All right, so the people are ascetics. Yeah? And that is, they try to punish the body. They try to say, okay, the body is evil. In order for me to be spiritual, I need to deny my body. Okay, they would be the ones that would be very good at fasting, fasting long times. Not for the right reason. Sometimes fasting is good, but they do it to punish the body. Just like a spiritual discipline, because the body, there's something wrong with it. Or today we would have a monk. They would be in a monastery. They try to separate themselves out from the rest of the world. They're living an ascetic lifestyle. Okay, that's where the word ascetics come from. And so we do have that too. In a time period where what the Greeks would do is they would beat their bodies, even sometimes still bleeding, all right? And they would just punish their body because they are trying to become more spiritual. And that is one reaction, okay, from dualism. The other reaction is actually the same mindset, but an opposite reaction. They react in the opposite way, and that's called libertinism. Libertinism. Yeah? And so those people will be the libertines. Not libertarians, but libertines. It's a little close, but I like libertarians. I don't like libertines. Okay, libertines are people living a libertinistic lifestyle. Means that you have also the word liberty in there, and that is they don't care what they say. It doesn't matter what you do with the body, because all what matters is all that matters is how your spirit is. But since it's separated, spirit and flesh, what you do with your body doesn't matter, because it's all going to burn up anyway at the end. All right? The only thing that matters is the spirit. So instead of punishing the bodies, they go the opposite way and live a very immoral lifestyle. Do whatever they want with their bodies, okay? It's like today would be like they would smoke and they would do drugs, and it doesn't matter what you do with your body, because all that matters is your spirit. Yeah? So they'll have a libertinistic lifestyle. And so that is really those two extremes that Paul also had to deal with in the church, because as I said before, when we become a new believer, it's not like we are suddenly converted. Well, we are converted, but it's not that suddenly everything has changed overnight. We still have a mindset that is very much influenced by the Greeks. Today too, in fact. Even today, even in the church, and many times Christians, because we also go to secular school and education and so forth, and so we have many secular ways of looking at things that are really infiltrating the church, that is not always Christian. And therefore, we are living, we have a double mind. The Bible teaches this, but we really do believe that. Many times it's not intentional, it's just because we are just over time, media has polluted our minds, and so we are just living a compromised lifestyle, and we also have a very compromised mindset. So you can imagine that people also in the church had their issues, all right? Like what we said what Paul said to the Romans, they really need to have a renewal of their mind. And so that is why, for example, how is it that they even allowed something like immoral lifestyle in the church? Well, that is because some of the Christians were on that particular camp. They have they are from the libertinism camp. They said it doesn't matter what you do with your body, as long as I can speak in tongues or prophesy and operate in the spiritual gifts that we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 14. That makes me spiritual. What I do with my body doesn't matter. And so we have these two camps. Are you following me? All right.
You can see how this is so strong in the church today.
Huh?
You can see how this is so strong.
Yeah, very, very strong. Yeah. And then, for example, in chapter 7 verse 1, it says, I'm now paraphrasing in my own words, but I don't know exactly how the NLT says it, it would be good for a man not to touch a woman. All right? But, and then Paul continues to speak about marriage and about sexual relationship in marriage. Because we also had people like ascetics that were saying, oh, we need to punish the body, we can't do anything with the body because the body is evil. And they would say they would, if they are married, they would not have sex. Because that's unclean, that is dirty, that is of the flesh, it's bad, all right? All from the dualistic mindset. And so Paul is also speaking to the ascetics. So he may be talking to the libertines in chapter 5, he is talking to the ascetics in chapter 7. So there are two groups in the church. And so sometimes you have to ask yourself that when you're reading, because it said, where is Paul going? Why is Paul saying this? Well, keep that in mind. Maybe now he's addressing a different group than before, and so he switches gears. But he's addressing both of those in the church. And so that is a little bit more background information about the church in Corinth. Now, so when one of our authors in the Bible write a book or write a letter, they're very intentional. They're not like, it's not like that they just had nothing to do and just some random thoughts comes to my mind and they just write it down. No, they really set out with a plan. So that is why every book in our Bible, we can actually see structure. It's just like if you were going to write a letter, you will think, okay, how do I open the letter? How do I close the letter? What am I going to communicate in the center? There is a structure to it. And so is that with all of the epistles. Paul is not just, because he's in prison and he's stuck there and has nothing else to do, may as well write a letter. No, there was a problem in the church and he's addressing. So all these, sometimes you will see it's being reported to me. And so then Paul responds to a report that came to his ear. But then he also responds sometimes says because it has been written. Something has been written to him. So there is a letter that came to Paul, and Paul responds to that letter. So he responds to what the Corinthians were asking Paul by way of letter and by way of report that has come to his ear. He's responding to that. So again, you need to picture yourself. Say you're having a phone conversation, and you have a phone conversation, and say you're a child, and you're overhearing mom speak on the phone. After mom hangs up, you probably know, if you listen carefully, what the whole conversation was all about. But you only heard one side. You only heard mom speak. You didn't hear the other side. You can't. And yet you know what she was talking about. How is that possible? Well, because if you're careful and you only hear one side, you know what's going on the other side. Therefore, you can still follow the conversation. Maybe not 100%, but maybe 80 or 90% of the conversation you can follow. That's the same with this letter and with all of the letters. Even though we can only hear one side of the conversation, we don't know what the Corinthians were saying, but by listening carefully like a child to mom on the phone, we still know what's going on the other side. That's why I tell you about these things. We know that those are going on because we chapter 5.
But then at some point in time, we still inject our own thoughts.
There is always a little bit of room for error.
A lot of assumption on our part.
There is, but if you do very careful observation and strong, long study, you can minimize it so that you are not just putting in your own thoughts. All right? You don't have to. No, but obviously, like, interpretation still allowed room for error. Just like when you're a child, you still maybe didn't get everything that mom was communicating. And you don't know everything about what's going on the other side. But you can make a very good guess. And so when it comes to studying the Bible, we can make an educated guess about what probably was going on and be pretty accurate. Yeah, but not fully. But again, remember what we are trying to do as students of the Word. We don't want to necessarily merely interpret everything and apply it, interpret into our setting and our situation. We need to know the original setting, the original situation, interpret it to their setting and with their historical background. And once we have done that, we can translate it to today. So like Vicky just said, well, that's a lot of that is happening today too. This kind of a lifestyle we still have today, both sides. Okay, so we would have, say you have when you go into 2 o'clock in the morning and you go into the city where the bars are open, people are partying and so forth. They probably are libertines a little bit more. Not all, I'm not going to stereotype them and judge them all, but you will have a lot of libertines in there. But then when I say, even when I go to a monastery, even if it's a Buddhist monastery, I'm not necessarily saying Catholic monastery, a Buddhist monastery or a Hindu, I don't know if they have their own monasteries or something like that, then you typically, they are ascetic. And so it's this mindset, this dualistic mindset is everywhere. Okay, because we all have come under the influence of Greek philosophy. Yeah? And so we as a church have to deal with that too, even today, as Paul had with the Corinthians. Yeah? Good. So, now, so then I said, okay, so if he's very intentional about writing his letter, wow, it's almost already permanent. So,
Good job.
thank you. So it is like, all right, what is Paul writing? That is content. But that is not only the tool that he has in his toolkit to communicate. He's also communicating by way of structure, which I will call form right now, the structure. The structure of the whole book, or there are so parts of the book that he is very intentional about it. Yeah? And then basically content and form is message. Yeah? That is like, we should remind ourselves. So when we study a book, we always look for the structure of the book. Now many times Paul will begin writing theology. And then when he finishes, he goes to application. All right? So because ideas have consequences. So laying down the right idea, the right doctrine, will then you can expect more positive consequences to follow. Ideas have consequences. Theology, doctrine needs to come first, and then we talk about how we should live, application. All right, so that's a typical structure. Even in this letter to the Corinthians, he does that. All right, but he also uses sometimes other forms of way of structuring. You know, sometimes people many of us probably are very linear in our thinking. You know, we go from A to B to C, and we don't want to go back to A. We want to just continue like a progression of thought, and then you make a conclusion. But there are also people, like, for example, Alicia, my wife, she also likes to think more circular. I think very linear. Sometimes my wife can think a little bit more circular, which is also very Asian. All right?
I think a lot of women think more circular.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good. I only know one well, so I don't know, but yeah, all right?
I think I'm more circular as well.
Yeah, and so they think more in cycles too, right? Well, there is something, not quite cycles, but something that Paul is doing too, like something that he is going to refer back to. But it's not circular, but it's something like it. And we call that structure radiation. Yeah? Radiation. And with radiation, as another it's not a label, not a structure, something that Paul maybe intentionally does. And now what is that? What is radiation? And that is, there is something in the center that he goes back to. So rather than repeating himself, A, B, well, that could also be called interchange, but circular, like always coming back to, okay, thinking in cycles. But when you are doing something what we call radiation is like you know, you have like a lamp and light radiates out, right? Okay, yeah, so like that, or you throw a rock in the water and the ripples are going outward, right? And so there is something in the center, yeah, in the rest of the letter, something in the center of the book, and then if you go back throughout the letter, you see that, oh, it all connects. It connects to the center point. We call that radiation, yeah? And I think 1Corinthians 13 is in the center of this book. And everything else, not like clean, perfect, like it is very easy to see, because then it would be, then it may be more of a chiasm where A is in the middle, and it's very clear B, C, D, like that. There's like corresponding that. It's not like that, it's more like this. We call it radiation. You have to look for it, and then you see it, I believe, as well. And I'm going to point it out to you as well. Yeah, and so that is the radiation. All right. So let me. I just realized I went ahead of myself a little bit. Let me backtrack.
The diagram you just did, and you radiate out all the points to a certain extent. You go around and you can connect all those points. Isn't that sort of circular thinking coming back to the center of what was radiated out? Yeah, also. But there are, for example, other books in our Bible where you see a very clear circle, a cycle, but not radiation. And so there is still a little bit slight different tendency. I don't know what to use. There is still something different, yeah? But I go a little bit ahead of myself. We also have this structure, a chiastic structure, and here, there are, I noticed three big ones, all right? And again, and that will still be that you have something in the center that's really important, but I'm talking about a different center than the love chapter in chapter 13, yeah? And I notice here, you already mentioned about, I think Linda mentioned about wisdom, right? And actually, the talk is about unity. And there is a lot of division among you. Some are following Apollos, somebody are following Christ, some other people are following Paul, all right? And so he's addressing that. And he even mentions Peter, Cephas. So some of you are following Cephas. So we have cliques. We have like little groups of clubs. They like to associate only with that little group, but not with the rest of the church. All right? Sometimes even in our youth and mission, sometimes we see that because we have all the people of the same language together, because we are very international. But we don't like that. We don't want people to form little groups. All right, we are one body, and we need to be united. All right, so we have sometimes cliques and divisions, and actually Paul is doing that twice. He talked about in chapter 1 and he talks about in chapter 4. But then in the middle he talks about wisdom, and he talks about godly wisdom. So that seems like that is like the center. Yeah. Then we have I talked about libertinism. And so he's addressing the abuses of the libertines. And the abuse of the libertines is something like, well, I'm free, right? I can do whatever I want. We are all under grace, no longer under the law. I can do whatever I want. I can eat whatever I want. Even if the food is sacrificed to idols, I can just go ahead and eat that, because I am free. All right? And you are not supposed to tell me how I should live. Can we recognize that for today? Don't tell me how you should live. I am free. I am a libertine, okay? What is good for you is good for you. What is good for me is good for me. Don't talk to me about how I should live, all right? And so we have the libertines, all right? But then Paul is talking about, yes, but we have the different sensitivities too, and we don't want to offend our brothers and sisters. So what about laying down your rights? Even though you have the freedom to eat whatever you want, What about if not for your conscience, but for the conscience of your believer, of your brother or sister? Why not lay down your rights and give that up? Not because it's wrong or a sin, but because of sensitivities towards your brother or sister. All right? And for example, drinking of alcohol, whether beer or wine or something like that. All right? I know even in America, when you go to the Bible Belt in America, and when you come to places where I know as people, as we are missionaries and we minister in many locations around the world and also many places in America, I know when I go to certain places and I teach, I need to be careful because we are in the Bible Belt. And they believe that if you drink a beer, you're a terrible sinner and you can even be kicked out of church. Right? Can you relate to that? Do you know you're aware of that, right? But then there are other places, so you go more in the north of America where it's not being frowned upon. Now I come from Holland. In Holland we also not at all frowned upon. It is very common. I mean, when you go to France, you will have a wine for breakfast. All right? So depending on which cultures you're in, there are very different views about everything. And the Bible is not clear and that says if you drink a glass of beer or wine, you're a sinner. In fact, actually the opposite says it's good to drink 1 glass of wine every day. It's good for the stomach, it says in Proverbs. All right? But, so how should we then live? What is the guiding principle? Well, the guiding principle is the laying down of your rights for your brother and sister. When it is appropriate, when I know it is offensive, I'm not going to say, well, I can drink beer because I'm free and you are not supposed to tell me how I should live. No, well, maybe here I can, but not say I'm in the south of America somewhere. Yeah? Then I need to be a little bit more sensitive. So I need to be willing, Paul says, to lay down my rights. Okay? Now that is simplification of everything you read because it's several chapters long, but that is the basic idea. Of course, we don't have time to go really in depth about it. And then the third one, so there are 3 chiastic structures: an appeal for unity, addressing abuses of the liberties, and then we have the love chapter. But it's also right in the context A, B, B. B is about spiritual gifts, chapter 12. But also we come back to spiritual gifts in chapter 14. But what is the guiding factor, what is like the principle that Paul is teaching is chapter 13. Everything we can say about well, actually, he is talking about bringing order to the public worship and about spiritual gifts, but the guiding principle is love. All right? So now we have love, we have laying down your rights, and we have wisdom. Are they not all together? Okay? Laying down your right is the loving thing to do, and it is also wise. Yeah? So you also see parallels right there. And so we see 3 of those chiastic structures. All right? Now, let's read. Okay, I just realized we are running out of time. Let's read together. Look at my little handout, the small one, 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burnt, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abides, these three, but the greatest of these is love. All right? Now let's bring it together as we conclude this morning, and let's see, okay, how these different verses in 1 Corinthians somehow link back. You can also say it the other way and like point back to the center. Yeah? The center would therefore be 1 Corinthians 13. Now look and help me. When you look at that little handout, 1 Corinthians 13. If I say, for it has been reported to me by close people that there are quarreling among you, my brothers. All right? What is the principle that he is trying to teach in 1 Corinthians 13? That is like, what are the people to be reminded of when it comes to 1 Corinthians 13, when this is being addressed? For it has been reported to me by close people that there is quarreling among you. All right? Okay, I think, for example, what do you think, Vicky?
Does it insist on its own way?
For example, do not insist its own way. Yeah? Very good. What else? Like I wrote down, love is kind because they are quarreling. Yeah? So that will be like, it radiates back to 1 Corinthians 13. When I say in chapter 1 also, what I mean is that each one of you says, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas, I follow Christ. All right? I am thinking, what would you think of 1 Corinthians 13? Love is not
arrogant.
Yeah, for example, or boastful. Both are similar. Love is not arrogant, or love is not boastful. Very good. Now say I go to chapter 2, and I'm just taking some scriptures, all right, and there are probably many more. And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. So talk about speech. All right? If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am but a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I'm just nothing. All right? So, lofty speech. All right? Which people like on the Apollo side probably were very keen upon it, because it turns out that Apollo was a very eloquent speaker. All right? For you are still of the flesh. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are ye not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way? Chapter 3, we are now in chapter 3. All right? And so he's rebuking them. There is jealousy and strife among you. And so what do we read? Love does not envy. Love does not envy. Chapter 4. So every chapter has something, but there are probably several. I have applied all these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, brothers, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against another. Again, love is not arrogant. Yeah? Another one in chapter 4. And we labor, working with our hands. When reviled, we bless. When persecuted, we endure. All right, if you go on in verse 13, it says, when slandered we entreat. We are still like the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. But so when I look at verse 12, it's like we respond in the opposite way. When people are reviling us, we bless them. When persecuted, we endure. Yeah? Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and so forth, Paul says. Yeah? And then the other verse that follows right there is when slandered, when a tree, and so forth. I already read it to you. Love is kind again. Chapter 5.
In all of these situations, it's not that we let people walk all over us,
Right.
or take advantage of us, or
Right.
or become their,
Right.
how do you say, foot mat or whatever.
Right. Yeah. We doormat. Yeah. Yeah.
Doormat. Yeah, there's a real fine line.
Right.
And as it says, if we don't grow weary in doing good, we will reap what we sow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
It's a real hard, fine line
That's right. Yeah.
of, loving God, the relationship that you have with God,
Yeah.
and loving your brothers and sisters.
Yeah. 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 Very good. All right. The next one would be, it's actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you. All right. And so what does Paul say? Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing. In 1 Corinthians 13. Chapter 5, verse 8. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Love rejoices with the truth. All right? Then verse 6, chapter 6. To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. For not rather suffer wrong, why not rather be defrauded? So there are some lawsuits, brother are taking another brother to court. And so Paul says, love does not insist on its own way. All right? Then we have the next one. Chapter 7. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And so love does not insist in its own way. Chapter 8. Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge piles up, but love builds up. Again, I think we had that before. Love is not boastful. Love is not arrogant. If anyone imagines that we know something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. In 1 Corinthians 13, we read that for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. Chapter 9. If you have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if you reap material things from you? If others share this rightful claim on you, do we not even more? Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. So it's again, love does not insist on its own way. Then we are the next one. Chapter 10. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and so forth. And so we can go on. I know it's now 10 o'clock. Let me see if I can... But you get the picture, huh? Chapter 10, verse 28. Okay, talking about, I already used that example. This has been offered in sacrifice. Do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you, and for the sake of conscience. Love is not, well, I wrote down, love is not rude. You probably could find a better one in 1 Corinthians 13 too. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practices, nor do the churches of God. Love is not, again, insisting in its own way. All right, so this is about having communion, Lord's Supper. And so again, love is not rude. We are considerate. So then, my brothers, when you come together to eat and wait for one another, love is also patient. Yeah. The eye cannot say to the hand, "I have no need of you."
Okay, so again, talking about, oh, I don't need you, the kind of divisiveness. Love is not rude. Pursue love and honest desire, the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. But do not have love, I gain nothing. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others weigh what is said. Why? Because love rejoices in the truth. Chapter 15, which is the resurrection chapter. The whole chapter is about our bodies being resurrected. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? Love believes all things. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruit of those who have fallen asleep. Love hopes all things. All right, and so we go on. There's too much to read right there because time is up. But love hopes all things, believe all things again, all right, about the resurrection.